Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very short workshop here on giving feedback and also different types of error correction that you will do in your classes. This is not program specific, although we will look mostly at correcting speaking issues because if you already teach college writing or PIP, we assume that you're already doing obviously written correction with sentence, paragraph, essay work. We also have a separate module all about writing, but right now we'll focus on speaking corrections. A lot of the time the mistake is made that we're just trying to get students to speak perfectly. Well, what is perfect in this case? So we will be looking at different things you should look out for and different things that you should concentrate on when you're giving feedback and correction in the classroom. Okay, so a little bit about why do we give feedback in the classroom. This is where things can become a little bit more program specific, but not too much. Students taking the SLE program, we know their ultimate goal is to be able to communicate well in English. And so that does mean we have to look at, well, what do we mean by communication? Is it something they need for work, or is it just sort of a general sense? Is it for travel? Is it with friends? Things like this. But mostly, as in that first quote there from Goethe, correction does much, but encouragement does more. That a class cannot be just about correction, because often that just means you lose motivation to want to continue if everything you say is being analyzed by the teacher. Okay, so what are we doing with feedback? Well, first of all, we're positive. We want to encourage the students to participate in the class, but also to return to future classes. You know, it takes a lot of time to become proficient in a language. And so if we take the time to give them positive feedback, you know, we enjoy what they're saying, we kind of involve them as much as possible. We're showing students that we do care about their development in English, that, you know, we are thinking ahead. But also we don't want mistakes to become fossilized where we're always saying the wrong things. Everybody gets that frustration at times when they simply don't know what is the right thing to say, or they know that this is wrong, but maybe no one has ever told them that. But in a classroom, we do expect that the teacher will listen out for things that could be confusing and things that could be incorrect, or sometimes simply where there's a better way of saying something. Okay, so as part of feedback then, of course, we have correction itself. Students do need to hear what would be considered accurate. Accurate is one thing, but what is appropriate is another. So even though, of course, we learn, or students learn a lot of grammar, a lot of structure, we can't expect them to always be worrying about that. You know, the most important thing is, do you as a native speaker, but ultimately do other native speakers, would they be able to understand what the student is trying to convey, but also by giving them some corrections about, you know, what is appropriate, what is considered a better way of saying something, or are there alternatives to what we're trying to say? It begins to help you build and structure your language. You have alternatives. It's very frustrating as a language student to think that there is only one way that you can say something. Okay, so we're trying to get that connection that exists between language learning, and conveying meaning. Okay, because a lot of people are not aiming to become native speakers, or they're quite realistic that they don't think they will become native speakers unless they actually go and live in an English-speaking country for a long time. So within the classroom, specifically SLE, but also PIP, you know, can we make a more structured learning environment that is not overly academic, not overly corrective? It's more about making sure students can express. So types of feedback. Well, like I said before, positive is really important. All you have to do is think back to the teachers that you've had in your life and how effective their teaching was. A lot has to do with their general feedback. You know, the feelings you got from those teachers, especially, you know, when you've been brave enough to volunteer an answer or speak out. And maybe it wasn't perfect, but as a teacher, we have to ask these questions. First of all, did they understand what it was I wanted them to do? Because if they didn't, that's the teacher's fault. Secondly, did they complete it according to their level? What do we expect at that level? So somebody who's in level 1, maybe a 1B, I don't expect to be able to make perfect complex sentences, but if they can actually convey a meaning, or at least part of a meaning to me, that's good. They're on the right tracks. Thirdly, are they looking to improve their English? Okay, in some cases at higher levels, maybe even upper intermediate, It might feel like there's little left to teach them, but there's always something left to teach them. So if the answer to all of these questions is yes, we start with a very positive stance. Okay, just like everything else involved in education, there are always different opinions on how we give feedback. So let's just take a quick look at those, hopefully debunk a few. The idea that assessment is potentially humiliating, yes, if done badly. And like I said previously, we've all been there. Teachers that seem to struggle with showing a caring side. Now, it's one thing to have a teacher in your own language who's not being particularly pleasant or very helpful, but when you're in a second language environment, then you are very sensitive to everything the teacher might give you. So if there is a feeling, of the stress or anxiety about what the teacher is doing or saying, or the feedback they're giving, or maybe their only form of feedback is just correction, then of course it gives that feeling of there's a pass or fail. But in many sort of conversational environments, there cannot be pass or fail. And the teacher must be very caring towards progress. And this means actually caring about giving feedback, okay, not just getting through the lesson. Not uncommon, there is another opinion that teachers, especially language teachers, particularly teachers working in a business such as this, should only ever give positive feedback. Basically, we'd be the cheerleaders of the English language education program. And of course, we should be positive, but it cannot just be positive. And the opposite of positive in this case doesn't necessarily mean that it's overtly negative or upsetting to the students. Positive feedback does encourage, but it can appear insincere if it's used all the time. Just think of yourself as a student of language, or when you're speaking in another language, you know that you're making lots of mistakes, and if you're given good constructive feedback, maybe someone will question you to say, is this what you meant, or is this what you meant? Okay, this is maybe a clearer way to say it. Then you appreciate that feedback. And also, even though it might seem like you're being negative, as long as it is very constructive in how you're doing it. So it's one thing if a student gives an answer and you go, no, that's wrong. Well, of course, that's going to cause a bad feeling. However, if you listen to the student and you write that student the sentence down, and then you look at, okay, I think what you're trying to say is, students will respond much more positively as well. Okay, a positive teacher can make good student relationships, good student-teacher relationships, of course, yes it can. A positive atmosphere in the room is very enticing, it's very attractive to everyone. Of course, if you spend too much time only, creating that atmosphere, you might forget to actually teach them, so be aware of that. A lot of teachers like to use peer feedback or peer correcting in some things. And there's an idea that sometimes that causes discomfort and embarrassment, and yes, I agree that it can sometimes. So you just have to be careful as a teacher. There has to be that positive atmosphere of trust in the teacher, trust in fellow students, and also a very clear set of boundaries. What is the actual task, rather than just giving something to someone and saying evaluate. The other students are aware that that student doesn't have the authority or doesn't have the expertise or know-how to properly correct them, but certainly in a good structured task it can work very well and gives them ownership of their learning. Particularly in conversation classes, a lot of the feedback is where we do give the assessments of the students, and this works in two ways. One, the teacher is listening and monitoring and calling on students to report back. So the teacher is assessing the student's performance in that way, and secondly, the student is able to receive positive praise, feel good, but also constructive tips, help. How can I maybe improve on this in the future? And motivation then is stimulated because we feel like a good structured learning environment has taken place. During a typical class, during activities, when do we correct? Number one, on the spot. So this means the teacher can correct any mistakes immediately as they happen. This has the advantages that, first of all, it shows you're listening, but the mistake is in context. If it's within a particular activity or a particular discussion, there's direct feedback. They can ask you questions about why is this, why is that, and then if they continue to speak using the correct form, it means, they're getting some good feedback. The disadvantage is if you do it too much. So if you're listening out for every kind of possible mistake and you're interrupting too much, So it disrupts the flow of conversation. Students might get a little bit frustrated, and if there are too many corrections in a very short space of time that aren't studied or written down, they're clearly going to forget them very quickly. Again, popular end of class review. So often we'll put mistakes, things that we've heard maybe to do with pronunciation, different things, up on the board, and we turn that into an activity. The advantage being it's a good focused activity. Everybody's looking and working it out together. The mistakes are also anonymous for those students who may be a little bit worried. Disadvantages is if we only do this towards the end of class, the mistakes are suddenly out of context, and so it can be difficult to apply them. When did that happen? Why did I make that mistake? Also, if you haven't left enough time, teachers often rush through these mistakes, meaning students don't really get a lot from them. Alternative then, we do more kind of formal corrections following each activity. So maybe here we can sort of pick and choose a few different ones, spoken, whatever they were, put them on the board at different points to help the students out with the next activities. So this means error correction is expected. Students know there's a sort of formal feedback, and the students can feel that the teacher is really focusing on them, helping as they go through. However, again, if you do this all the time, between every activity we do this, it can become tiresome, and also you need to have a few sort of original methods to how you're doing this, not the same way every time. To this then, do it as homework. Teacher has students write down the mistakes in a notebook, they take them home, they have more time to focus, they can maybe start to see patterns. Disadvantages: in many conversation classes, students forget to do homework, and often they might find it too difficult to correct, which can cause a bad lack of motivation. Alternative to homework, review in the next class. The teacher begins with a short review, plans some questions or plan an activity, or maybe they take some of the corrections from the previous class and they highlight this up on the board before we move into the next lesson. Of course, the disadvantages here might be students that were or are absent, and they become a little bit random if they're not clearly connected to a topic, although the teacher, if they make a good review, can connect them to the topic quite well. Quickly look at some of those particular activities that you can do. Number one, catalogue and present. So as you're going through the class, keep a notebook with you, note down mistakes that you hear, but not just to do with structure, also to do with pronunciation, word choice. This will help you start to build up patterns that you see happening in the different levels and the different classes. And then, we can get these on the board, and you shouldn't auto-correct. It's a good idea to also get the students giving some information, or indeed they could actually work together to try and fix them, and then we come back together as a class. A sort of an extension to this, or something a bit different for students with a little bit of a higher level, call my bluff, catch my mistake. Students work together in teams, they look at sentences on the board without anything done to them, deciding which ones are correct and which ones are not. And then, this gives them that idea that, oh, well, I knew that was correct, and maybe even in a higher level, you can have them try and explain what it is. Corrections and feedback to do with how they're using language, of course, have to evolve over time and with the levels. So when it comes to things like understanding when to use one type of sentence versus another, explanations can be quite difficult here, and often we're not correcting so much as expounding meaning. So here we might, compare these sentences. How are they different? How do they communicate a different idea, and then you can really see how are the students developing. In review then, what are we looking for in all feedback and corrections? Well, we're looking to be supportive, we're looking to be honest, we're looking to be positive. We praise first, and importantly show interest. Don't try to autocorrect too much, because the students won't exhibit understanding. Okay, you have to really get into what is the meaning, what is the structure, and how do we use these sentences. Because if they can start to see that, they get that feeling of success, and then that in turn builds motivation. And ultimately, that's what we're trying to do with speaking corrections, is get them to understand that we are going to do this together. It's going to take time, but we can do it as long as you put in the time and effort, and the teacher puts in the time and effort to make it enjoyable. Okay, thank you for listening to this short workshop on feedback and error correction. For more information, please go on to the SLE training on Canvas, and there'll be some more information and examples there of feedback and corrections. Or you can email me at pagodatrainer@gmail.com, and we can talk some more. Have a good day.